Hello again, and welcome back to the 2022 Fairfax County Housing Symposium. This hour, we're pleased to have with us an outstanding panel of presenters to address narrowing the wealth gap through homeownership. During this session, our panelists will emphasize how wealth can be created through homeownership opportunities. Again, if you're just joining us at the symposium, we are pleased to entertain questions from the audience. To submit your questions, or if you are having any technical issues, please use the Q&A icon on your screen to submit your comment. We will be answering the attendee questions at the end of the session, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the time allotted. With that, I'm happy to introduce the moderator for this session, Mr. Mclaughlin, CEO of the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. Ryan is the CEO of one of the largest realtor associations in the United States, with approximately 13,000 professionals who transact over $15 billion in sales annually in the Washington, D.C. metro area. A graduate of the Leadership Fairfax Institute and devoted to the development of business, nonprofit, and public sector leaders with vision and commitment, Ryan also serves on the board of directors for the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. In 2020, he was included in Virginia Business Magazine's Virginia 500 Power List as one of the state's most powerful and influential leaders in real estate. Welcome, Ryan. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity. And just an interesting point of clarification, I guess we sent you a bio from maybe a few years ago, because the volume of real estate that real estate professionals in this region are transacting annually is actually now 19 billion, up from 15 billion that you had referenced. So you can just see the explosive growth that's happening in the real estate industry. But on behalf of the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, I am honored to be here today to moderate what will be, we hope, an informative discussion. We're going to be exploring the important topic of narrowing the wealth gap through homeownership. And as mentioned by Ben, we represent over 13,000 real estate professionals throughout Northern Virginia and the greater DC metro area. We are headquartered right here in Fairfax County, and our members are dedicated to creating homeownership opportunities for all who want to call Northern Virginia home. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we know that homeownership brings substantial benefits for families and communities. And not only are there significant benefits, financial benefits to owning a home, but there's also social benefits. And our panelist, Dr. Sturdivant, will go into greater detail about those financial benefits of homeownership. But we also know that owning a home often leads to social benefits, such as higher academic achievements for students, better health outcomes, and increase in civic involvement in communities, leading to a stronger sense of community. Next slide, please. And not only does homeownership provide tangible benefits to individual homeowners, but it also supports the financial health of our region. The availability of affordable housing is critical to all of us who live and work in this region and to the economic future of Northern Virginia. Next slide, please. Despite those significant benefits of owning a home, we know that not everyone has access to the wealth building opportunities of homeownership. Traditionally, one of the most predominant ways for households to accumulate wealth is through homeownership. Homeownership allows wealth to be passed down from generation to generation. And we know that the rates of homeownership are not equal between white and non-white households. And you can see that in the slide deck here. This disproportionality in homeownership has contributed to racial wealth gaps. Next slide, please. The National Association of Realtors, our counterpart at the national level, in partnership with Realtor.com, developed an affordability score to compare the share of households in different race groups with the share of active home listings they're able to afford. So a higher score suggests better affordability conditions. And based on this research, it was determined that 35% of white, 25% of Hispanic, and only 20% of Black Americans have an income higher than $100,000. And as a result, the nationwide housing affordability score for white Americans is calculated to be 0.86, 0.60 for Black Americans, and 0.70 for Hispanic Americans. And based on this report, specifically in Virginia, Virginia has an affordability score of 0.75 for Black Americans, which is good in the sense that it's higher than the national average, but it's still below the affordability for compared to white Americans. Next slide, please. We know over the past several years, buying a home has become increasingly challenging for many residents in this region, and particularly for first-time home buyers. And we also know that in Fairfax County and across the country, it is difficult to build single-family homes that are affordable to low and moderate income households. The short supply and cost of land, labor, and materials is too great. And you can see the trend here on this chart of how home prices have risen in the region. Next slide, please. We recently released our February market data for our region. And that shows, if you look all the way on the left-hand side of the slide, that's the overall NVAR region. It shows that overall prices are rising and the total number of home sales are actually declining due to the lack of available homes for sale. There are some outliers. If you look at Fairfax and Falls Church, and that's generally based on the smaller size of those jurisdictions, one transaction or two transactions can really impact the final numbers. Next slide, please. So we need innovative policy solutions to increase and develop a diverse housing stock that's affordable to a range of households. It's particularly important in our current environment with increasing house prices and low inventory. Strategies like creating and implementing zoning changes that support diversity in housing types and lot sizes, increasing the density allowance to provide for more efficient development, and decreasing average lot sizes are solutions we know are being considered in communities across the country. Working collaboratively to educate members of the community and our elected officials is really critical to creating positive change. And that's why it's important for us here to lead the conversation around today's important topic. Next slide, please. The Northern Virginia Association of Realtors is committed to being a part of the solution. That's why we're part of this program today, and we're involved with so much more in the community and with our local government and state government officials. Secure, sustainable housing is the foundation of a thriving community, and today our panelists are going to take a deeper dive into the opportunities and roadblocks surrounding homeownership and the wealth gap. We'll also address proposed solutions for creating greater availability and affordability in Northern Virginia. Solutions like funding for affordable housing construction, creating tax incentives to renovate distressed properties, converting unused commercial space to residential units, and zoning reforms to allow things, for example, opportunities for building accessory dwelling units. And you can learn more about what we're doing on that front at nvar.com/public. Next slide, please. It's now my pleasure to, well, this is all of our panelists on the slide deck here, but it's now my pleasure to start with our first presenter and panelist, Dr. Lisa Sturdivant. Dr. Sturdivant has been involved in research on economic, demographic, and housing market issues and local housing solutions for more than 20 years. She currently serves as chief economist with the Virginia Realtors, leading the association's research on housing market and economic conditions throughout the Commonwealth. In her role, she prepares regular reports on the residential and commercial real estate markets in Virginia, and she also conducts research and analysis to support the real estate industry in the Commonwealth. Dr. Sturdivant, welcome.
Ryan, thanks so much. I really appreciate having the chance to be here, and hello to everyone who is joining us today. You know, my job is to provide a little bit of background on the homeownership gap here in Northern Virginia. Ryan really set the table on some of the important reasons why we look to homeownership as a really critical part of narrowing the wealth gap, both here in Northern Virginia and really more broadly. So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifics and sort of tee us up to think about how the private, nonprofit, and public sectors can work together to close the gap and to expand homeownership. So on the next slide, to put some of those gaps in numbers, we know that homeownership is the primary way that Americans accrue wealth. That has been true for a long time. And as Ryan mentioned, homeowners' wealth is much higher than that of renters. Now, this is national data, and it's from 2019, which is the latest data available. The average family wealth of a homeowner was about $255,000, and for renters, their average wealth was about $6,300. So the median wealth of homeowners in America is 40 times that of renters, and that is as of 2019, as everyone on this call knows, the housing market has been very competitive over the last couple of years. Existing homeowners have accrued record levels of housing equity. And in fact, in the last year alone, according to CoreLogic here in Virginia, the average homeowner has gained more than $40,000 in housing equity just in the last 12 months. And so this gap has only widened over the last couple of years. On the next slide, not only are there differences between the wealth of renters and owners, we know there are significant differences in family wealth when you look at it by race and ethnicity. Again, this is national data, 2019 is the last available, but it shows the wide gaps in family wealth between white households and Black and Hispanic households. And this gap has moved around a little bit, but it certainly hasn't improved in recent decades. We know that the average white family has 8 times the wealth of the average Black family, 5 times the average wealth of the Hispanic family. And a primary reason for this racial wealth gap is due to the disparity in homeownership rates. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. On the next slide, talking about the housing market, we know that housing is expensive in Northern Virginia. Ryan put up some home price data. The median home price across the region, now this includes condos, townhomes, single family, the median price is about $600,000. And using a typical assumptions, that means a household or a family would have to earn about $115,000 a year to qualify to purchase the median priced home in the region. In some markets, of course, prices are even higher, and they've been rising really quickly. So in the top chart, just again, some more numbers that show how the median price has changed since 2017. And on the bottom chart, you can see lines that show home price growth across some of our jurisdictions. And it's a lot of lines, but you can see in 2020, home prices were rising at 5, 10, 15%. Price appreciation has slowed a bit in some of our Northern Virginia jurisdictions, but not everywhere. You can see, for example, in Loudoun County, home prices continue to rise at greater than double-digit rates in 2021. On the next slide, we do expect home price growth to moderate a little bit in 2022 for a variety of reasons, but affordability on the homeownership side is not going to get much better. So this is a chart that shows how incomes are rising across Virginia, the blue line, and then how home prices in Virginia, and then home prices in the DC region, which is the dashed line, how those prices have changed. And if you'll note, before 2000, home prices and household incomes, they were rising at about the same rate. And that's sort of a good thing, right? It means that new households coming into the market are earning incomes that are keeping up with how fast home prices are rising. You can see, of course, what happened in the last housing market run-up in 2003, 4, 5, 6. After the 2008 financial crisis, we saw prices and incomes were sort of rising at the same rate again. But look what's happened recently. In 2020 and in 2021, we can see that gap between income growth and home price growth is widening again. Now, it's true that over the last 18 months, we've had historically low mortgage rates, so monthly payments haven't been rising as fast as home prices. But now we're in a situation where home prices and mortgage rates are rising at the same time. And this has been keeping prospective home buyers out of the market, particularly first-time buyers and buyers with more moderate incomes. And the next slide shows a map of the white-Black homeownership gap in Virginia. And across the Commonwealth, in general, almost everywhere, white households are more likely than Black households or Hispanic households to be homeowners. In fact, and this is a little bit of a distressing statistic, the African-American homeownership rate in Virginia is as low as it was more than 50 years ago when the Fair Housing Act was passed. So the African-American homeownership rate is about 48% in Virginia, and that is the same as it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed. So there has been excruciatingly little movement on homeownership. Differences in incomes and credit scores can explain some of that gap, but structural racism and discrimination have really set the foundation for this long-term disparity in access to homeownership. And furthermore, we know from survey research and other studies that implicit discrimination and bias continues to operate in our housing markets. If you look at Northern Virginia, you can actually see that the Black-white homeownership gaps are some of the largest up in our region. The gap is 37 percentage points percent in Alexandria, 31% in Arlington, 50%. That means that white households homeownership rates are 50% higher, percentage points higher than Black homeownership rates in Falls Church. And so it's a pretty significant gap here in the Northern Virginia region. On the next slide, strong demand has really fueled strong price growth, but supply has been far below what is needed to keep up with demand. This shows the number of housing units authorized by building permit in Fairfax County over the last 30 years. And as you can see, there was a big drop off after the last recession, but we have not rebounded in terms of the level of housing production needed to keep up with demand. There are challenges to new construction. They call it the 5 L's. There's only 4 up there: land, lumber, land, labor, and laws. The 5th L is lending, and lending hasn't been a problem, but now with the Federal Reserve raising rates, lending is going to be another challenge to new construction. So it is important to look at the ways in which we can prepare better folks for homeownership, or bring more people into homeownership, whether that's by looking at how creditworthiness is measured, or providing implicit bias in the housing market. But tackling the demand side of the challenge alone is not going to solve the problem with this homeownership gap. In fact, programs like down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers, which well-intentioned, could actually exacerbate the housing affordability problem if not enough housing is built to keep up with demand. So none of those demand-side solutions will help make a dent in narrowing the wealth gap unless we build more homes. And so on the next slide, just to sort of put a little bit more in perspective about where we are in terms of homes affordable to those first-time buyers, I took a look at the percentage of homes that were sold in 2021 that we could call starter homes. These are homes affordable that were sold in 2021 and were affordable to a household earning 80% of the area median income, which, as you know, AMI varies across the state. But look at Northern Virginia. I mean, all the pink basically is in Northern Virginia, which means that less than 10% of the homes were affordable to folks at 80% of AMI. In many parts of the region, 10 to 20% in Arlington, Fairfax, and in Loudoun County, it was an even tighter market. So this idea of having homes affordable to first-time buyers ends up being a really important part, and thinking about ways to facilitate the production of more homes affordable to those buyers. So on the next slide, sort of had a chance to lay out some of the challenges, and of course, Ryan laid out a lot of the both financial and non-financial benefits about homeownership. Homeownership is really, and the last slide is fine. Homeownership remains an essential part of the American dream. And it turns out that millennials and Gen Zers are exactly the same as prior generations in terms of wanting to be homeowners. Even more importantly, homeownership is a way in which wealth is created, the way intergenerational wealth is supported. Family wealth through homeownership supports being able to send kids to college. It supports families starting businesses. And homeownership is also a key element of the region's economic development strategy. It's important for attracting and retaining workers. In fact, Stephen Murray, who recently left the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, said that housing availability and affordability is the biggest economic challenge in Northern Virginia. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan, and I look forward to having a conversation with Ryan and the other panelists to talk through some solutions about how to open up housing opportunities here in Fairfax County and in the rest of the region. Ryan?
Very good, Dr. Servan. Thank you for that great data and analysis. And one thing I did go back and look at that the audience may be interested in looking at is the National Association of Realtors just issued a report in late February looking at the homeownership rate in general and then breaking it down by race. And what I see here is that nationally, Fairfax County is basically almost identical to what you're seeing in Fairfax County, or I'm sorry, nationally is almost identical to what we're seeing in Fairfax County. That 30% gap that you shared, Dr. Servan, it mirrors what's happening on the national level. Now, it's obviously different than what's happening in Arlington or the other markets that you showed with a wider gap like Falls Church. But it's something, a trend that we're seeing nationally as well. So thank you for that. So what we're going to do here is I get to introduce our next 2 panelists. What we're going to do is allow the next 2 panelists, or give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about, kind of their priorities, what they're doing here on the panel today, what they're doing as part of active leaders in the community. And then we're going to turn it into more of a moderated kind of Q&A discussion amongst ourselves. And we will be looking in the chat to also take your questions from the audience. I know there's a couple already in there. So with that, I want to start with having the honor of introducing Fairfax County Supervisor Rodney Lusk. He has been serving as lead district supervisor since January of 2020 and is the first African-American male elected to the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. It's just hard to believe, but congratulations for your leadership there. He currently serves as chairman of the Public Safety Committee, vice chairman to the Personnel and Reorganization Committee, member of the Audit Committee, and member of the successful Children and Youth Policy Team, as well as secretary treasurer for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Prior to his election, Supervisor Lusk served 32 years as a Fairfax County employee, which included a variety of roles, delivering human services along the historic Richmond Highway corridor, serving on the staff of 2 former Board of Supervisors, and as National Marketing Director for the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. Additionally, he previously served as a member of the Fairfax County Planning Commission and the Fairfax County Park Authority. Supervisor Lusk's priorities while in office include opening a workforce development center on Route 1, reforming police policy, addressing the county's affordable housing crisis, improving our pedestrian and bicycle safety network, and implementing a bus rapid transit project on Richmond Highway. In addition, his office coordinated with Fairfax County government agencies, local nonprofits, and the Lee District residents to organize food distributions across the community in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Supervisor Lusk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I appreciate that very kind introduction. I'll start by saying affordable housing is such an important issue, and I know that all the folks here on this call can understand the need for us to really have urgency in trying to address it. As a person who has previously worked in economic development, I did that, as Ryan said, at the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, and talking to companies, talking to CEOs about locating to this market, we had to explain to them what were the opportunities for their employees to be able to get housing. And I'm going to be clear in saying, as we see this increasing price on the cost of housing, it's going to be harder for the entry-level folks to be able to acquire and purchase that housing. And I think Stephen Murray is exactly right. This could be our Achilles heel if we don't come up with some solutions to solve it. Additionally, what I would say is, as I look at my own district, I represent half of the Richmond Highway corridor on the west side if you're going south towards Fort Belvoir. And on the west side, we have some communities that have been devastated by COVID. I mean, when we look at the job losses, we look at the income levels for those residents, they are making, on average, in some of my zip codes, approximately 51% of area median. So they can't obviously afford to buy housing here in Fairfax County. And we've got to think about ways to support and help them to do that. And one initiative that I'm very, very focused on is looking at ways to bring skills, training, and employment to the residents in that area specifically, so that they can move up their ladders of opportunity into positions in the skills trades, in med tech, in tech, in green building technologies. And the reason for this is if they have higher income, they'll eventually be able to afford housing here in Fairfax County. So if we think about someone who's working in a retail job, making $11 per hour today, they could get in a skills trade on an entry-level position, roughly $20 to $25 per hour to start. 2 people making $25 per hour would be equivalent to about $100,000 per year. So we'll start to see some opportunities for those entry-level folks to be able to afford housing. Additionally, in Lee District, I'm very focused on looking at ways to take public lands and use that to build more affordable housing. And I'm taking this to the point of saying my own office, the office that I'm in right now, will be redeveloped over in Kingstown, and this office is going to be vacant. This police department is going to be a vacant site. I've asked the county to look at whether or not we can convert this property into affordable housing. We've looked at other locations, and there's one that's pretty significant on Oakwood Road, just off of South Van Dorn, where we're able to take what was originally a stormwater management facility, cover it, and then make it an underground detention facility. And then we're putting right now 150 units on top of it that will be housing for seniors. So we've got to be creative, and we've got to look at working with our partners in the nonprofit areas and the for-profit areas. And I'll talk more later in the panel about some suggestions on how we interact with the private sector in this arena. And then also thinking about something that Walter Alcorn and I did when we were both on the Tyson's study, which goes back to like 2007, 8. We made a suggestion that we should have commercial and industrial properties make a contribution to the housing trust fund. So there's a $3 per square foot contribution for each development that comes in as either, commercial, office, or industrial. And as a result of that commitment to the housing trust fund, we are now building, or in the process of building, a affordable housing development that will go up in Tyson's. So things of that nature are going to be helpful in addressing this issue of inventory and bringing more units online. So I look forward to continuing the conversation as a panelist here and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you again, Ryan.
Sounds very good, Supervisor Lusk. Thanks for the introduction. And at this point, we'll introduce our next panelist so that she can share a little bit about herself. And that is Soledad Portilla, the Vice President of Land Acquisition at Beezer Homes. And her responsibilities include new deal sourcing and acquisitions, as well as shepherding projects through the entitlements process. She has over 15 years of experience in residential real estate development and management. Soledad is the immediate past president of the Northern Virginia Builders Industry Association, or NVBIA. She's also a founding member and former co-chair of the Women in Building Industry Committee, and is currently the vice president or president-elect of HomeAid, Northern Virginia, the nonprofit arm of NVBIA. Soledad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real honor to be speaking with you today on this panel about the homeownership and the supply side. I have a background on market rate housing, and I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the supply side, how as builders, we've been saying over and over for years that we need to be producing more houses in order to fill the demand, in order to try to, correct the high rising of houses due to the low supply currently that we're seeing in the market. So I'm looking forward to the discussion in the panel. Like Lisa said, the 3 and 4, 5 Ls, Fairfax County commands a really high premium in the land side. So it's getting more and more expensive to build houses that are in that affordable range, only because land cost is so expensive currently in Fairfax County. And I also want to touch a little bit on the entitlements process and maybe brainstorm on ideas on how we can bring more housing units to the market faster in partnership with county and county staff, to expedite and maybe, be able to shorten the time to market that we currently see when we're trying to build more houses. So, Ryan?
Very good. Thank you, Soledad. If all the panelists can turn on their cameras and unmute themselves, and we can kind of dig right into questions. We've got about 30 minutes left here for some good discussion. And I'll start with the benefits of homeownership for individuals and families, and the broader economic benefits of homeownership. And it seems like, based on some of our preliminary conversations before this and in talking with Eric at GMU, there seems to be a shift in thought process on the county side of, okay, we want to focus on more than just home, or just a place to live as a shelter, where we can provide some sort of rent subsidy or housing that someone can live in and rent. and shifting that to more of the home ownership opportunity and the benefits and value of creating generational wealth. So what do you think? What do you see as the broader implications for the local economy in expanding home ownership opportunities in our region? And maybe Supervisor Lusk, or would you want to take that one first?
Sure, I can hop in. So I'll say we talked about workforce originally, right? So one of the great values is that for our companies, if we have folks who are committed as homeowners, they're going to be active workforce participants in this economy. And I think most of our companies would argue that that's something that's beneficial to them. You don't want to have to, have difficulty retaining and also attracting talent. Second, I'd say, obviously from a tax-based standpoint, it helps with other services. So if you have folks coming into the community, then you're going to drive the need for additional retail. It just has additional spends within the economy that are supportive for what we all care about, and that is helping us pay for our schools, our libraries, our parks, and all of the great services that our residents here in Fairfax County have come to appreciate. So I think those are kind of important things and drivers.
Yeah, Ryan, you mind if I chime in there?
Jump right in.
Because Supervisor Lusk has got it dead on, and just to sort of throw some numbers out there, or just some trends out there. Before the pandemic, we were seeing the number of 25 to 34-year-olds leaving Virginia for other states far outpacing the number coming in. So we had negative net migration of our young workforce. When you look at the state level, 100% of those out migrants were coming from Northern Virginia, and they were going to places like Tennessee, North Carolina, Atlanta, places where the cost of buying a home, since these were folks at that first-time homebuyer age, where the cost of buying a home was less. And so if we want to retain these workers who might have been educated in our universities and our public schools, who have built their sort of human capital at our businesses here in the region, they need to feel like they can stay. And very quickly, someone out there might be saying, well, Lisa, it's a remote work world, right? Why do we worry about workers being near businesses here in Northern Virginia? We know people are going to live and work anywhere. But the fact of the matter is, post-COVID, we're already seeing it. People returning to the office, people wanting that in-person environment. And so we're going to need homes where we want the jobs, because as we all know, homes are where the jobs sleep at night. And so thinking about how to use housing as an economic development strategy, I think, is really important.
I'm sorry, I have to unmute myself. Soledad, was there anything you wanted to add to that, or do you want to move on? Okay. So let me, before we get on to the next question here, there was a question in the chat, and this may go back to your presentation, Lisa, to the extent you can answer this. You spoke about African-American home ownership. Did African-American home ownership rates ever exceed the 48% since the Fair Housing Act was passed? Because you referenced back to how it was back then. What factors may have helped increase or decrease it over time?
Yep. So statewide, we did see the African-American homeownership rate begin to rise after the Fair Housing Act was passed. We saw both access to housing markets be opened up by laws that prohibited outright housing discrimination. And we also saw incomes rising for several decades, where African-Americans were having more opportunities in the workforce. Those gains, though, were really eaten back in the decades that followed. And the only other time we saw a big bump up in homeownership rates among both white and non-white households was during the last housing market boom, but that was fueled a lot by subprime lending. Again, not the right way to go about expanding homeownership. So there have been cases where we have seen progress made on the homeownership front, but nothing seems to have been lasting, at least relative to where we were about 50 years ago.
Thanks for that context. And sorry, so the next question I have, and Soledad, maybe you want to weigh in first, and then we can go to Supervisor Lusk on this. I'm sure he'll have some good response to this. What's the most important thing that local governments in Northern Virginia, as well as the private sector, could do to help facilitate the development of more housing, more affordable housing, and in particular to first-time home buyers? And how do we expand first-time home buyer options in Fairfax County?
Sure. So I can start by saying that Fairfax County, the reality is that it's almost 100% developed. So there aren't any huge opportunities for greenfield building anymore. So what us builders are doing is looking into opportunities to redevelop either existing commercial offices or retail, or commercial in general that can be converted into residential, right? So with that, it comes with challenges, and it's giving us the opportunity to build a little bit more dense developments, right? So it's less single family detached and more stacked and townhouses, which is, the most efficient use of the land that is getting redeveloped. So we've been working, and Fairfax County has been a really great partner on this, trying to facilitate and expedite those conversions and rezoning and entitlement of land, so that we can build houses more quickly, which is, an issue for us. It's a lengthy process that costs a lot of money, and also that, makes the affordability even worse. We're waiting and spending and time value of money of that investment. It just passed through to the price of the house. So anything that the county can do, and it's not only Fairfax County, it's all the municipalities around here to help us expedite that rezoning, entitlement, site planning process, permitting process, so that, we can hit the ground running and build the houses as quickly as we can. We've been getting very efficient in the time of construction. Of course, with COVID, we've had all kinds of issues with supply chain disruptions and delays with materials, lumber, appliances, garage doors, things like that. But that's gonna go away hopefully soon. And then, that is my ask for the county. And I'll let Supervisor Lusk maybe chime in on ideas.
Go for it. And as you do, Supervisor Lusk, if you could think
Yes,
about Soledad, if you can think about a successful project that has happened, a development that has happened, like you said, looking at commercial space, vacant commercial space, or properties that just need to be redeveloped. But go ahead, Supervisor Lusk, if you want to respond to some of what you heard.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is maybe launch off of a couple of things that Soledad said. So clearly she's right. We've got to be looking at conversions as a possibility. And those conversions could be office, former office, could even be retail space, depending on where they're located, and could be hotels. So you think about what would be an easy thing to convert to a living situation, it would be a hotel. We've also got to think about, and I think I made this point when I was making my introductory comments, and that is public land. This really helps drive down the cost of these projects. And we've got to be open as a county. And I'll say over the last year, 2 years or so, we've been pretty aggressive on this point about identifying publicly available land that could be converted to affordable housing. Additionally, I'd say working with our not-for-profit partners like Habitat, working with our ecumenical organizations, because let's think about it. Many of them are at a crossroads with regard to their sites. So some of these sites have huge parking lots, and they're thinking about downsizing the size of their structure. And the question is, could we, the county and a nonprofit partner, help them take that parking lot and turn it into affordable housing? And I think this is something that really is interesting. And as a person who drives along Franconia Road every single day, because my office is on Franconia Road, and if anyone's driven on Franconia Road, you'll know something that's kind of unique about it. There are churches on every corner almost. And I think there are going to be opportunities for us to kind of work with those organizations, nonprofits, our ecumenical organizations. And I'll say the private sector, and I think we'll move to that one in a second, but that one's critical as well, is how do we kind of get all of these components in the mix in helping us kind of drive down the cost of this affordable housing.
So economies of scale is another aspect of the bill. Well, I guess let me backtrack. Are any of you familiar with a successful outcome from one of these redevelopments, whether there was a partnership with the county or it was a private development in Soledad, where there was either incentives or expediting of permits like you were talking about, or kind of loosening zoning restrictions? Are you aware of any that have cropped up in the last couple of years?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of anywhere we've maybe launched a test project to expedite, processing of and the entitlements. But I can tell you that if you look at what is in the pipeline right now through the county for entitlement rezoning, it's mostly redevelopment. It's redevelopment of street malls. It's redevelopment of zoned parcels that were intended to be office buildings now that we're trying to convert into residential. I can't think, there are smaller parcels of land, like small assemblages of like maybe single family detached houses that are not conversions. But I think the majority of the projects are right now zoning changes.
Supervisor Lusk, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I guess the question is affordable for this project, actually. So now I'm having a little bit of a pause because I know that there was an commercial office building that converted into housing and or office space. It kind of had the option. K-Fritz was the developer of this project in Alexandria City. This is about 3 years ago. I know it's been successful, that you have a mix of folks living there. And the cool thing, and this might go to what Lisa was saying as well, is folks who have to decide about living and working in the same space, if you have the ability to, have your unit kind of configured to serve in either capacity, it gives you a lot more flexibility. And that's an option that we've seen with some of these kind of converted office to residential or hybrid office and residential in the same complex.
And so it sounds like there's some good opportunity there to keep exploring, working together. Great. So the economies of scales that came up, where there's, maybe it's easier to convert or build a single. It's not as easy to build single family affordable housing, and even if you do, it's not on any sort of economy of scale. It's just sort of a one-off. What are some creative approaches that you think can help us reach economies of scale in terms of housing? Are there creative solutions or initiatives that you're working on or that you're aware of that can provide additional opportunities for homeownership from that perspective? Any one of you want to jump in on that?
Well, I can, I'll just mention, just sort of leads off, and thinking about examples that have been successful. I lived in the city of Alexandria, and the city of Alexandria, along with Fairfax County, have been very creative in how to create partnerships between the Public Housing Authority, and private developers. And this has been more than a decade ago. I'll grant you that, but I was able to purchase into the workforce housing program in the city of Alexandria, and it was the way in which I was able to access homeownership as a new professor at George Mason University, and then 7 years later was able to resell that house to a young couple that were getting ready to have a baby who were at the income I was at 7 years earlier. So this idea of shared equity programs that can then be also combined with this providing public land at reduced cost to a for-profit developer who was able to make sure that all of the public housing got redeveloped at the same number of units, but then was able to incorporate at higher densities, both market rate and these workforce units. That's not an easy project, right? As you all know, but it feels like it has to have more than just one element. It can't just be land. It can't just be incentives. It can't just be the public sector. It really seems like the most successful ones, in my opinion, have been where all of those things come together, and we all know what to do, right? There's nothing new we need to discover. It's just how to put them all together.
And if I could add to Lisa's point, when you look at the workforce housing units that we're developing in Fairfax County right now, most of those are rental. I mean, you think about it, we don't have any for sale units, typically condominium units for those workforce dwelling units. And that's unfortunate, right? I mean, the idea here is if we had more of those, then people would have the opportunity to be able to purchase and own their own homes. So I think we've got to maybe look at that issue a little bit and try to figure out if there's something that we can do to incentivize developers to consider building condominiums. I know it's a market-driven thing, but we did have the borough and Tysons do that with their most recent residential projects. I think it was one of the most successful condominium projects in the region, if I'm correct. And the price per square foot, as I recall, was over $900 per square foot, which is pretty high for development of that sort. So clearly, in that development, there would have been the option for some of those to be affordable, not probably many, but still an opportunity for someone to be able to live in that development who probably works in Tysons. And the last thing I'll make a point here is that this idea about ensuring that we have more affordable housing is important in that you don't want people driving 2-3 hours to get to their place of employment. And this issue, believe it or not, exists for our public safety professionals, our teachers, our librarians, all of the folks who are engaged in public service. So we've got to do a better job of providing options for all of the kind of available folks who are looking for housing. But this impacts those who provide our public safety and other services, which I think is pretty significant.
You speak to a comment that we got in the chat, which was, don't overlook the fact that many jobs simply can't be done via remote work. Most of those we learned during COVID are frontline or essential workers. So that's a valid point that you bring up. Back to sort of solutions. This is an audience question, and Soledad, this is more directly for you, I think. How can Fairfax County, we talked about, more efficient and effective and permitting processes. From your perspective, how can Fairfax County shorten the time to market? And are there any policies that can make land more accessible for affordable housing? We know land is only one aspect, but what are your thoughts on that, Soledad?
Sure. So on the expedited processing of rezonings and entitlements, I mean, it's not complicated. Every project has its roadblocks, but we know there can be a way to get them processed faster. I mean, I know we can do better. I know that we can improve the process, and we talk about this industry and county constantly trying to figure out how to make it go faster. And it's an ongoing conversation, maybe a fast tracking of projects that have a housing component. I know there's more than we can do. We're just not there yet. It takes a long time. It's between 24 and 36 months between an application submitted to when we are able to, start vertical on a project. So I know there are ways. I just don't have the right answer. It'll be a collaboration.
Sounds like we need to get the right people at the table. Or able to
well, I'll say this, Brian, I'll volunteer to be engaged in helping find solutions on that, because I think you're right, Soledad. That's an important thing. And I'll say the county has made some improvements over the years. I know we tweaked our peer review process. I was a part of the review for that. And I know we've constantly, and you're right, we've got to iterate and improve over time. And I like this idea of possibly fast tracking for housing projects, having some designated methodology for that. And then the last point I'll make is I think you might be familiar with the project management process in the county, which I think is extraordinary at helping some of our larger projects get through. Maybe we can see if this could be something that they also get involved on as well.
And this conversation is great because we all understand the importance of housing in the economy, for the workforce, for economic development. And we sometimes find roadblocks with neighbors and that don't want more housing, but we need to push the right message as to what housing means for everybody and how important it is that we build more housing that's affordable for everyone, from entry level to move ups and high, second move ups. So it's just important that we're having this conversation.
And if I could, Ryan, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, if I could just add to what Soledad just said. I'm sorry, it's a really good point. So we had our committee meeting, our housing committee meeting just a couple of days ago, and I brought up this kind of very same point, which is we have to figure out how we can provide information to our communities so they understand the value of affordable housing projects. I mean, I think the problem now is many of them look at it and they look at it in the negative, like it's going to increase crime. That's their assumption. Not to say it's correct, but that's what's in their head. It's going to reduce their property values. It's going to cause some problem that they don't have today in their community. And we've got to do, I think, a better job on maybe even putting together, I said, videos or putting together information that shows kind of like, what do these units look like inside, outside? Maybe even have some of the tenants talk about, who they are, if they're willing, and express the importance of this housing. Because I think if people start to really understand it, I mean, you think about seniors who can't afford to stay in our county unless they can move into a senior affordable housing project. And the Oakwood one goes down to 30% of area median. I mean, that's unbelievable. That's incredible. So it's going to allow people to stay in our community who already made contributions for years and years. But you're right on there. So I'm asking the question, and maybe we can talk about that separately as well.
So there's so you brought up something about communicating with the residents and making sure they understand that this is going to be good for the community. And one of the things that we've been tackling as an industry is implicit bias, and Lisa touched on it earlier in sort of a different way, but trying to make sure that the real estate industry and realtors understand and learn about their own implicit biases and how those may come across when they're engaged in transactions or working with clients. So that idea of trying to move away from this perception that it brings in something worse than it is huge, and we would welcome the opportunity to be a partner on that effort as well in the community. But so we've got about 9 minutes left. We've got a lot of questions. So I'm going to try and sift through some of the audience questions and the ones that we wanted to make sure we covered. So let me Supervisor Lusk, if you can take a moment to talk about the workforce center in the Lee district and how that is intended to help residents become homeowners.
Yeah, I'll go quickly. I alluded to it earlier in my comments, but again, acknowledging that the incomes are significantly lower in my district than in other parts of Fairfax County. Again, 51%. $51,000 per year versus $124,000 per year in income. What I know and what I see is that people need help. They need assistance in order to get the skills and the training and then ultimately the employment that's going to pull them up that ladder of success. So we are developing the center that'll be right behind the Costco on Richmond Highway and Walmart. It'll be 50,000 square feet in total for the community, and then there'll be about 8,500 square feet for this workforce component. And it will have skills training that includes all of the different trades. So you think about building trades, which includes carpentry, welding, HVAC. We'll have med tech positions with Inova Hospital. Amazon will provide data center operations positions. And what I think is really, really interesting is Dominion Energy wants to provide a training component for their new wind and turbine program. So this wind and turbine program is going to have 183 turbines on the coast of Virginia Beach, and up and down the East Coast, there are going to be ultimately thousands of them. So they'll need to have people who are trained and able to do that. So this center will help people move into the middle class, will help them be able to afford to pay market rate. And that's the beauty here. We're trying to transform the lives of so many of the residents who've been sort of stuck in this unfortunate wheel for so many years. And if we're successful, that's what we'll prove out. So stay tuned. And the center is going to open in July. And again, I want to thank Northern Virginia Association of Realtors for the support of our garden that we'll have at the center as well.
We're happy to be a part of that. We've gotten a couple comments themed around manufactured housing and how that in its many forms may be a way to help create more affordable home ownership. They could possibly be built on smaller parcels of public land. How do we provide opportunities for households and manufactured homes to gain wealth and equity through home ownership opportunities? Welcome any of you to jump in. Lisa, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, no, and I think this idea of finding new models of housing in order to expand home ownership is really critical. And I know that manufactured housing is one piece of that. The other idea I want to just put out there, because it has a demographic component, we know that our 65 and older population occupies a really large share of our home ownership housing. By some counts, it's 8 out of every 10 homeowners in like the city of Falls Church is age 65 and older. And if you think about the younger households who are moving up, the younger families. So in my mind, you also have to be creative about, are there ways to expand opportunities for accessory dwelling units, let's say for older adults who might then go live with their adult children. And then, I mean, it sounds so like transactional, but then freeing up a house, right, for a young family. At the end of the day, as much as we are eager to make sure we support folks' incomes and provide opportunities for their incomes and employment skills to grow, if there aren't more units, it's not going to solve the problem, because that'll just drive the home prices up more. So thinking about manufactured housing and also smaller units on existing lots, I feel like has to be part of the solution, given what we know about the demographics of our existing homeowner base.
So we've got 4 minutes left, unfortunately. So rather than continuing on this question or ask further questions, I think it's probably best if we just, each of you take a minute or so and just, if you have any final thoughts you wanted to make sure we conveyed. I know it's not a lot of time, and then maybe we can compile these questions and get back to some of the audience members through writing, something like that. So Supervisor Lusk, would you like to wrap up with your comments?
Sure. One thing that we didn't really get to talk about is the private sector engagement in helping us with this crisis, because it is a crisis here in Fairfax County and other parts of the country. I really like the model that we see with Amazon, where Amazon is making the linkage between their workforce and the provision of funds to support the construction development of affordable housing. So I think we look at Fairfax County, we have 11 Fortune 500 companies that are based here. And I think at some point we should maybe, I don't want to use the word challenge, but we should engage with them in a conversation about how do we develop possibly a fund, which would be a housing fund that they could all contribute into, to allow us to, acquire land and build new facilities. And as Lisa said, this problem is not going to be resolved by one entity. We're going to have to leverage the capabilities of all nonprofit, for-profit, public sector, and private sector. So the beauty here is they're a pretty big part of this community. And when you think about the number of companies that we have, it is substantial. So I think there's an opportunity here to leverage the private sector in helping us with this effort as well.
Excellent, thank you. Soledad, would you like to go next?
Sure. I can say that, we will build as many homes as we are allowed to build, how many homes they let us build. So, we're active participants in bringing in more supply. So we're there, and we'll work with the county in trying to solve this issue. We're partners. We've been partners all along, and anything we can do to come up with creative solutions to, increase the supply, we should keep the conversation going.
Right. Good comments. Lisa?
Just very quickly, I want to pick up on something Supervisor Lusk mentioned about, and I think Soledad did as well, this idea of how we talk about housing. Oftentimes we talk about the impact of housing only on the negative side, the extra school kids, the more traffic, and we need to take those issues on head on. They are not non-issues, right? But the fact of the matter is we often don't talk about the positive side of the housing, is the extent to which it's linked to job creation, the extent to which it's linked to the fiscal base of the community. And so as much as we could talk about numbers or, all the data, at the end of the day, it's sort of bringing more people into the conversation, understanding where their concerns lie, and providing education to help a dialogue for those who think that more housing is a bad thing, when actually it is a thing that will help Fairfax County and the region continue to grow and prosper.
Very good. So we're at the end of our time. This was really informative, great conversation. I feel like we can have this conversation for another 2 hours. And maybe we should at some point, even if it's offline, because it sounds like some great partners right here to help resolve. And I heard a lot of solutions, which is good. We weren't just focused on the past, focused on what's next. And the shift towards home ownership is really good, and the benefits of that. So thank you all for your time. There are lots of questions, Ben. I'm not sure if we're able to compile those at some point, but it would be it may be helpful for everybody else who has the questions. But the program today has also been really valuable. So thank you, Ben. Thank you all for being a part of this.
Absolutely. And thank you, Ryan, and to our panel, Supervisor Lusk, Lisa Sturdivant, and Soledad Portilla. We really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing the value of your expertise.